Year 1960. A freezing winter morning in the French countryside. Albert Camus, philosopher, novelist, the second youngest person ever to win the Nobel Prize in Literature, is sitting in the passenger seat of a luxury Facel Vega. The road is clear, the sky is calm, and then, in an instant, the car lunges off the highway and smashes into a tree. Camus dies instantly. The world mourns another tragic accident, until investigators find something strange in his coat pocket. A train ticket. Not just any ticket, the very ticket for the train he was supposed to be on that day. So why was Camus in that car at all? And here's the question that keeps the conspiracy alive. How does a luxury car, the so-called Zeus on wheels, suddenly lose control on a straight, empty road with no witnesses? But the strangest part isn't the crash. It's what came after. Because somehow, 6 decades later, a man buried in French soil still has teenagers quoting him on TikTok like he's their emo boyfriend. So how did a poor boy from Algeria grow into the philosopher who haunts us from beyond the grave? To understand Camus, we have to go back to where it all began. It's November 7th, 1913. A tiny village in French Algeria. Inside a farmer's house, a baby is born. He looks around and sees an older brother, and a mother who already seems far older than her years. A small, simple family. Poor, but happy. At least for the moment. Because just a year later, World War I erupts across Europe. France is at war. Camus' father is drafted and handed a rifle. But think about it. What happens when a farmer with no training is suddenly thrown into battle? Option 1. He wins the day with pure courage. Option 2. He freezes, and within weeks he's injured. Sadly, it's the second. Camus' father doesn't survive the war. Now the family is reduced to just Albert, his brother, and their mother, who suddenly has to raise 2 boys on her own. But there's a problem. She's quiet, uneducated, and painfully introverted. So raising 2 boys on her own is impossible. So she calls for help from her own mother, the grandmother. Now the little family moves into a cramped apartment in the poorest part of Algiers. No running water, no electricity, and then there's the grandmother. To put it simply, she's a tyrant. Harsh, controlling, unforgiving. So Albert thought, I need to get out of here. But how? He dreamed of becoming a football star and was brilliant in his studies too. But his grandmother didn't care about books or balls. She told him, once you're 11, you'll be old enough to work. What's the point of studying? And besides, I'm not wasting money on school. And then, just when it seemed like Albert's future was closing in, one man stepped in and changed everything. Louis Germain, his school teacher. One afternoon, he pulled Albert aside and said, "You're gifted. I'll put your name down for the scholarship exam. I know you'll pass." And he did. He sat for it and passed. Not just passed, but won a full scholarship. That scholarship opened the doors to secondary school, to literature, to philosophy, to everything that would shape his destiny. Years later, when Albert Camus won the Nobel Prize, the very first letter of gratitude he wrote wasn't to family or to another writer, but to his teacher, Louis Germain. One day, Albert sits down at his desk, loads a blank page into his typewriter, and writes, "Maman passed away today." Or maybe it was yesterday. Does it really matter when it happened? This was the opening of his most famous novel, The Stranger. And the strange, unsettling logic behind it would later be called absurdism. But hold on, we're way ahead of ourselves again. We'll get there. Don't worry. For now, let's jump back to young Camus. That scholarship he won carried him straight to the University of Algiers until life struck again. At just 17, Camus was diagnosed with tuberculosis. His football dreams collapsed overnight. No football career, no chance of military service either. The disease made him unfit, and his family? Let's not talk about them for now. So all he had left was writing, and maybe, just maybe, the hope that a woman's love could bring some light back into his life. But it's never that simple, is it? At just 20, Camus thought he'd found love. On June 16th, 1934, he married Simone, a beautiful actress, but with a morphine habit. And Camus, being the confident young man he was, thought, I'll fix her. How hard can it be? And for a while, it almost worked. Until 2 years later, Camus went kayaking with Simone and some friends, fell ill, and came back to the hotel early. That's when he discovered a letter tucked under Simone's pillow. He thought, weird, must be medical papers. Why would she hide this here? So he opened it, and inside, well, it wasn't a prescription. It was more like, hey, gorgeous, missing our little injections. Love, your favorite doctor. Simone was sneaking around with the very doctor Camus had hired to save her, staring at the letter and thought, okay, maybe I can't fix her. So they divorced. Fresh off his disastrous first marriage, Camus thought, okay, let's not screw this one up. I'll do it right this time. But remember, this was the 1930s. No Tinder. If you wanted love, you had to actually leave the house. And Camus, he wasn't exactly struggling. Handsome, charming, Nobel Prize potential oozing out of him. At one party, he met Francine, beautiful, elegant, and most importantly, not addicted to morphine. To Camus, that was already an upgrade. So they tied the knot, had twins, Jean and Catherine, and for a while, everything seemed normal. And that's when Camus thought, she might cheat on me, but what if I cheat on her first? Enter Maria, a 21-year-old Spanish actress. They met during a theater rehearsal. One kiss turned into 13 years of secret romance and more than 800 160 letters exchanged. Maria knew about Francine, but fell for him anyway. When Francine finally found out, it destroyed her, and she ended up in a hospital. But here's the kicker. Camus wasn't done. Between his marriage and his 13-year affair, he still found time for another mistress. In his final days before that car crash, he actually had plans to see all three of them. So yeah, you already know the setup. Camus was riding with his friend Michel through the French countryside when, boom, crash, dead on the spot. But was it really an accident? Let's break it down. First off, this wasn't some rusty old jalopy. It was a Facel Vega, a luxury French car marketed as Zeus on wheels. How does Zeus on wheels just randomly spin out on a straight, empty road? Here's where it gets interesting. Camus had walked away from the Communist Party and was openly criticizing the Soviets. And remember, this was the Cold War. You trash-talked Moscow, you didn't just get unfollowed, you got erased. Another theory goes like this. During the Cold War, books weren't just books. They were weapons. Weapons of public opinion. Whoever controlled the books controlled the story. And when a writer like Camus could sway millions, he wasn't just an author, he was a problem. In fact, years later, a local journalist uncovered notes claiming Soviet officials wanted Camus dead. The theory? KGB agents tampered with his tires using a discreet tool that made the car fail at high speed. Boom. One accident. Problem solved. But here's the other weird part. Guess who was driving the car that day? Michel Gallimard, Camus's publisher. He's the one who convinced Camus to ditch his train ticket and ride with him instead. Convenient, right? And when the crash happened, Camus' side slammed into the tree first. Michel's side didn't. Camus died instantly. But Michel lasted 5 more days. Whatever theory you believe, one thing is certain. On that road, in that crash, the world lost one of the greatest authors of the 20th century. But here's the part I can't get over. Albert Camus has been dead for 65 years, and yet he's trending like he just dropped a mixtape. Scroll through Instagram and it's chaos. And it all goes back to his most famous novel, The Stranger. The story of a guy who shrugs when his mom dies, shoots someone for no reason, and accepts that life is meaningless. In other words, the universe doesn't care about you, and neither does Camus. Now you'd think that's bleak, but on Insta, that's a love language. And yes, Camus was handsome, brooding eyes, cancer stick always dangling. The kind of guy who could ruin your GPA just by sitting in the same cafe. I get it. But some of you are way too thirsty. Like, read me philosophy while I cry in your arms. But seriously, read The Stranger. The language is simple. And beyond the novel, his quotes still slap today. I rebel, therefore I exist. Don't walk in front of me, I may not follow. Don't walk behind me, I may not lead. Walk beside me and just be my friend. That's why Camus still matters, because his words live on, sharp as ever. So subscribe and let's keep making sense of the absurd together.